Welcome to a community built of tomorrow's business leaders. Hey guys, I'm William Freitas, and this is the Socius Podcast. Socius, welcome back to another episode. Today we've got Esther Colman. Esther, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
And Esther's from Seed HR. So tell us a little bit about what you do, a little bit about Seed HR, and I guess what it is you guys specialize in.
Sure. Well, Seed HR is designed to provide excellent HR services to small business owners. So we operate an outsourcing model. So businesses that aren't quite big enough to have their own internal HR resource, we can provide support from end to end all the way through the employee life cycle, whether it's assistance in recruitment or staff development, culture, policies, advice, training. It's pretty broad. We class ourselves as a bunch of HR generalists. We've got 5 in the team. So there's myself, my business partner, and 3 others.
Okay. And so let's dive into, let's go straight into it if we can. Like, what sort of business needs HR advice or HR support? Many would be, you sort of mentioned businesses that aren't quite big enough, but you could argue every business needs HR support. So what's your response to that? At what size do you start thinking, well, you don't need a HR division, but you need some HR support?
I think when you become a solopreneur and think about engaging your first employee, that's a great time to have a chat with us. So we can have a discussion about how best to engage them, making sure that you're paying them correctly, giving you a really compliant employment contract, and just thinking about some of the basic policies and procedures you might need to kind of tide you over until you get to that next stage. Okay, nice. And I guess to what level of service do you get involved in? Is it, do you look at value propositions? Because I know you and I have sort of spoken about EVPs. Do you want to speak a little bit about that? Yeah, I think that's one of the more exciting parts of what we do, is certainly thinking about what is it that is being a magnet for your organisation. What types of things are people going to want to be attracted to? And sometimes that doesn't come up until we are assisting our clients with recruitment, and we find there's a disconnect between what the business owner thinks their offering is and how that's perceived out in the marketplace. So, and really thinking outside the box. It doesn't take a lot of money and a massive budget to think about what is it that people are going to get in terms of culture, flexibility, professional development when they come and work with you, as well as having, being a bigger fish in a smaller pond and getting so much exposure when you come and work for a small business.
Yeah, because it's so hard to differentiate as a small business, right? How are you finding small businesses are competing against larger businesses in that sense?
Certainly on flexibility, on the exposure that they will get that they might not get in a larger organisation. I think in a small business you have the ability to really see what difference you're making, and I think that's a big factor for people. So while small businesses in terms of salaries might not be able to pay at the top end of the market, they've certainly got lots of other things they can use to kind of draw people in. And I think something I found when I joined the small business owner community, 6 years ago now, was it's so challenging, it's so different, no day is the same, and I don't think I'd ever want to go back and work for a larger organisation again. Yeah,
it just keeps it refreshing, right? So let's take a couple of steps back. We can come back to the HR piece and dive into that a little bit more. Obviously the audience is other small business owners or people who are looking to set up a business, but a lot of them take a lot of quite inspiration around founders' backgrounds and so on. So how did you get into HR, and then how did you start Seed HR?
I got into HR, I didn't intend on getting into HR. So I started out my career in retail and on a sales program to become like a sales department manager. But while I was doing that, I saw the then personnel manager and what she was doing. And I thought, oh, that looks like an interesting job. Plus I'm nosy, and I knew she knew everything about everyone in the store. So that piqued my interest, but I wasn't sure. So I hedged my bets and I did a business degree, which had an element of HR in it, but also, accounting, finance, psychology, which a lot of HR is psychology.
Yeah.
And then I got on a graduate program for HR in the UK and really enjoyed it. And my first real HR job was an international one, which was fantastic. Pre-kids, lots of travel around Europe and Africa. And then, I came to Australia in 2001 and ended up heading up HR for Franklin Supermarkets, and then a couple more jobs before I thought, I'm not challenged enough. I'm not getting pushed out of my comfort zone. And that's when I thought, could I take the skill set that I have and run my own business with it? And
so with the business now, is it wrong to call it a sort of a fractional HR service, or is it the right language?
Yeah, outsourced, fractional. A lot of what we do is kind of remote support, although we do have clients that want us, certainly in the initial stages, to have some visibility on site. So it's not as if we would be on site with our clients 4 or 5 days a week.
Yeah.
It might be, a couple of days a month for the first 6 months. But a lot of what we do for our clients is kind of remote, over email, over phone, and we provide the service that way.
And so I ask that because it feels like fractional services have been the flavour for quite some time now. Why do you think fractional services work as opposed to having the internal resource?
You get the benefit of, certainly in our case, we've got 5 HR specialists with many, many years of experience. And you get that at a fraction of the cost, but you also get amazing value, good responsiveness. You may not, as a small business owner, be able to afford a more senior HR professional. So we do work with some clients where they have an internal administrator or coordinator, and then we come and assist at that kind of more strategic. Where is your business going? How can we create a people plan and actions to help you achieve your business objectives?
I agree with that. I would say the biggest risk for small businesses is not knowing what you don't know. And particularly when it comes to managing people or creating value propositions or anything really when it comes down to business, the opportunity cost is what you don't see. And having a fractional resource, much like yourselves, makes complete sense because you get to have that value from those 5, in your case, those 5 resources, learning from other businesses as well, and providing that industry insight. I think that makes sense.
And we can not only, because we're kind of industry agnostic, we work with lots of different industries, we can actually pull and see what might be a great practice in one industry and suggest it to another business owner who may never have heard of that before. So you're right about you don't know what you don't know. And that's really rewarding for me when we kind of talk about a concept or an initiative and a small business owner has never heard of it before and they're really super excited to get on board.
And so talk to me, you mentioned psychology and HR is a lot of psychology. Say some more about that. Why is HR so related to psychology?
Because, and this is more kind of in the leadership realm, for me, being a leader is about understanding what makes other people tick. But to do that, you first got to understand a bit about yourself, right? It's kind of self-mastery, then you can try and lead others. So what makes people tick? What are their fears? What are their dreams? How might fear play out in the workplace in terms of them being worried about making mistakes or the whole imposter syndrome and trying to kind of tweak your leadership style to really get the best out of your team. And culture is also a great deal about psychology. What is it that we love about working here? How do we create a sense of belonging? And that might be individual to each person. I think that's tricky because it means there's no one-size-fits-all strategy necessarily, because we are such unique and complex individuals. Sometimes Would be easy if we hired all robots, but
Yeah.
that wouldn't be fun and I wouldn't have a job.
It's probably not too far off with AI
true.
and the like. But what sort of tools do you use to sort of ascertain psychology, particularly in the recruitment piece, or when you come in and impact teams midterm? Because naturally, you're not going to just get involved with businesses that are starting out. You're coming in and potentially changing some cultures or remediating. What are some of the tools you might use from a psychology and personality even perspective?
Yeah, so with recruitment, we use some kind of job fit assessment tools, and part of that is the technical expertise to do the role, but part of that is looking at what does success or what has success look like in this particular job. So it's a project manager, and it may mean that that person needs to have a particular flair for being super organised or being confident or being good at negotiating. So that all kind of gets wrapped up in some of that recruitment decision making. We do some kind of self-assessment work with teams, engagement surveys, for example. So really asking those questions around why it is they stay with an organisation, how they resonate with that organisation's values, those types of things. I'm not wedded to one particular personality test. There's a lot of those out there, and I think to use those well, you really need to be kind of skilled at administering them and providing real feedback. I think my favourite would be, I know DISC is super popular, but also there's another great framework that Belbin generated all about different team roles. So there's a number of different tools you can apply to a number of different situations, and it's about encouraging participants to be quite honest about where they're at, where they see their strengths and development areas.
And talk to me about engagement surveys. Like, a lot of people might not really understand what that is, and what level of business do you think needs an engagement survey?
It could be super simple. It could be something as simple as 3 questions. What's one thing you love about working here? What's one thing that makes you stay? What would be one thing that would encourage you to move to another organisation? It's a bit like the antithesis of the exit interview, if you like. Why are people engaging with you? And I think as business owners, we sometimes assume we know the answers. So that's really simple, useful. Do it on SurveyMonkey, costs you nothing. If you want to get a little bit more sophisticated, you can link surveys to people's resonance with your values, to competencies, to your vision. How well do they know your vision and where you're going as an organisation? And then if you're larger, you can kind of then divide those results, whether it's demographic or age or job title or function, and really kind of drill down into that. But it's a great way to have a starting point. If you're going on an HR initiative around really improving your culture around respect at work, let's say, I would always recommend that you do some sort of engagement survey to measure where you're at now, and then you'll be able to see some of the impacts further down the line, hopefully positive, on some of the HR initiatives you're doing, if you can tailor those questions to the particular outcome you're looking for.
And I guess that's the beauty of it, right? Like, you can sort of amend certain practices within the business to keep some of your staff, right? Because obviously it can be quite costly replacing staff. And you want to try and keep your best staff.
Yeah.
So it makes absolute sense. So really it's not limited to a particular size of business, right? It's, as long as you start hiring staff and you've got people who are your assets, then you can engage in a engagement survey. Cool. Now, what are you finding are the trends for, I guess, businesses in today's day and age? Like, what are they adopting from a HR perspective that's slightly unique and different? Anything particularly?
I think it's that flexibility, whether it's, flexibility around, let's take leave. Some organisations want to be a lot more inclusive around public holidays, for example. So they might have, instead of having the prescription of Christmas Day, Boxing Day, someone may not celebrate those, and they may wish to take their chunk of 10 or 11 public holidays at a different time. So flexibility around leave, so buying additional leave, people having kind of birthday leave, that's been around for a while now. But I think it's being able to kind of tailor something that works for your business and works for your employees. Obviously, it needs to be affordable. A lot of people come to us asking what's happening around company paid parental leave. For many years, that wasn't a thing that small businesses could afford. But I think more so now, even with the advent of the government paid leave, more small businesses are thinking, how can we ensure that those that go on parental leave come back? How can we incentivise that? How can we make sure that we onboard them back into the organisation well? And how can we make sure that they don't have to go without, and we can kind of show that we want to pay them and give them that little bit more flexibility to have the time off they need with their children.
And you might say the surveys are one of these things, but often what I see with particularly small businesses is the question comes up with, how often do you go to your team and ask what are the things that keep you here? Or rather, like, if it's flexibility, do you just implement the flexibility and hope that resonates with people, or do you ask the question? Well, what percentage of business owners do you think fall in that category where they respond reactively or respond proactively?
I'd say it's probably 50-50.
Okay.
I think it's always good to get input from your team before you even embark on something, because what you might think is important to them actually turns out that it's not that important. And you're not always going to be able to please everyone all the time. Some businesses that we work with are very consultative. Any policies or policy changes, they will consult with their employees and they will actively seek feedback. Others are a little bit more prescriptive. This is the new policy, here it is. But I always think consultation's good. It doesn't mean you have to agree with everything that your employees want, because it might not be affordable, but at least you're engaging them in the process. And they're really aware of what the policy is, rather than it being stuck in a shared drive somewhere.
Yeah, perfect. Let's chat a little bit more about Seed HR and what makes Seed different. You've been in business for quite some time, naturally, but the Seed HR brand is quite young. Do you want to take us on a little bit of that journey?
Yeah, so my first foray into small business was through a franchise model, and that was my comfort blanket for the first 5 years. And then Seed HR was born in 2024. Should know that off the top of my head. And we brought all our clients over, and so it was like this new brand, but with an existing cohort of our amazing clients.
Yeah.
And I think what makes us different is the relationships we build and the trust that we build. Being in HR is a little bit like being an accountant. We're privy to a lot of information, whether it's salaries or employee data, and trying to help business owners navigate their way through that. So it's about that relationship building, level of trust, kind of a responsive service, and the flexibility in which we work with our clients. So we either work with them on a retainer basis, or if they come to us and go, I just need one policy, or I just need a bit of advice on this, or I need some advice about managing this person's probation, then we can just do that on demand as and when they need us.
That's the perfect part, right? Being on demand whenever someone requires you. So that's the difference, right? In terms of having an internal resource, instead of paying that person a full-time salary where there may not be HR issues necessarily. They can engage with you when they need to.
Yeah.
Talk to me a little bit about the franchise model and the perceived comfort blanket, I guess.
I come from a family of no business owners.
Okay.
My parents were teachers. My sister is a doctor. So owning a business was something completely new to me. And for many years, I was actually quite afraid of doing it. And it was my husband, who is pretty familiar with businesses, that stirred me on and said, look, I think you can do this. But the comfort blanket was, I didn't know anyone else in small business. I didn't know how to do a website. I didn't know how to do so many things, or even how to approach anyone to do that stuff. So that stuff was all there for me. And all I really needed to do under the franchise model was, find some clients. But all that other back end stuff was done. And
if you look back on that, naturally, it resonates with me. I think a lot of people are afraid of taking that step, of the step of business ownership. Both my parents weren't necessarily business owners, so I can completely get that. Do you now look back on that and think, wow, that was really quite silly, like being that afraid, because now obviously your business is successful. Obviously you're grateful you took that step. In hindsight, how did you feel about that decision?
In hindsight, I think you're a bit of a late bloomer there, because I was in my mid-40s and I look at younger people now and they have such confidence to do this in their 20s. And I think, that would have been amazing. Half of me thinks that, and half of me thinks I needed the experience and my time in HR and that kind of judgment and maturity to do really well. And to build those relationships and have that technical expertise. But yeah, if I had my time again, I'd definitely start earlier.
Yeah, it's funny, I have this conversation with so many people. Look, I was pretty driven and started the business quite young. I was 25 when I started the business. I was in the industry for 8 or 9 years already, so I had some confidence that I was going to do it. So a lot of people ask, what does it take? But I honestly think everything happens for a reason. It's where I was at that point in time in my life that allowed me to make that decision.
Yeah.
I think the same goes for you. I think you're starting at 40. Everyone judges on, I'm 30 years old and I still haven't worked out what it is that I want to do. Everyone's path is different. So I guarantee your trajectory would have been completely different because of the experiences that you had up until 40. So, I've been lucky enough to see your business thrive and grow, pun intended with the seed. But it's been fantastic, and no doubt, late bloomer or not, I think it definitely made sense. Everything happens for a reason. So
right.
Congrats to you.
Thank you. What
do you think your number one factor for success was?
Consistency, I guess that kind of ties in with discipline. So consistency in how I was networking, consistency in how I was reaching out to clients, consistency in the level of service we were delivering to clients. So I think making sure, consistency in how I'm showing up on social media. So building and building and building through consistent, it's, the atomic habits, forming those daily habits and delivering on them, and being quite disciplined in how I do that. So I think that's probably a big factor in just moving the dial slowly and growing in a sustainable way.
And how do you manage to remain consistent when you're looking to scale? Because I think, like every other entrepreneur, you just want to say yes to everything.
Yes.
And you see every opportunity. If you're anything like me, you're an opportunist.
Yeah.
And you almost feel like you can scratch a little bit behind that particular, scratchy or whatever it might be, and up comes a new opportunity, and then you say yes to that, and you struggle to meet whatever commitment it might be. So how do you manage to remain consistent?
We have invested in an amazing platform that has helped us to systematize nearly everything that we do. So that is key. It means I have to be more disciplined, not to write in my little notebook. I have to put it on the CRM, or I have to make sure that I'm invoicing through the platform. So I think for us it was investing in systems early.
Got it.
Because without those you can't scale, without just adding more people and then having inefficient systems. And then something that someone in our team actually said to me, whose background is very much in recruitment and talent management: hire just before you think you're going to need to, if you can. So you're not scrambling, everyone's tearing their hair out, no one's then got time to train the new person coming in because you're all completely flat chat. So I think we've tried to do that as we've gone along.
Nice.
And hopefully we might be making a new hire in the next
Awesome.
few months.
That's exciting. Talk to me about the systems, because I no doubt would have imagined there was a bit of friction too with the franchise component. It's pretty hard to measure, I appreciate, and you may not have a number in your mind, but I would be really interested to know, like, what difference it would have made for you to have been able to develop a system at Seed HR that would allow you to grow much faster than dealing with, I guess, legacy systems that was part of the franchise model.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts?
Absolutely. The level of freedom to be able to pick solutions that are perfect for us, that are affordable for us, that we're in control of, has been incredible. So definitely that sense of freedom. and to be able to go for new opportunities without, needing kind of permission, if you like, to bring in new products or services.
Yeah, no, I love that. And what are some key issues that you see in today's business world that needs changing?
I think from an HR perspective, the legislation around employee relations is so complex. The modern award system, 122 awards. That's a frustration for me, and I also know it's a frustration for our business owners, and that's why they use us, because we hope to take some of that pain away. But I would love to see a more simplified structure or more leeway for small business owners, certainly when things go legal, because they don't have the resources like some of the big banks, for example, to be able to fight, whether it's a workers' comp claim or an unfair dismissal claim or an adverse action claim. So I'd like to see more consideration given to small businesses around that.
Are there any other jurisdictions where they simplify it, or are we in just a country that overcomplicates everything?
I think it's overcomplicated.
Okay. And I mean, for the naive business owner who may not know all of the pay awards, some might think, well, they pay their staff really well, and that surely that surpasses the pay award. Do they need to consider the award and review that anyway?
If the work that the person is doing, or the industry that the employee or the organisation is in, is covered by an underpinning award, you can either pay someone quite a bit above that award. But where it becomes tricky is, many awards have penalty rates for things like evening or weekend work. So if you do have someone that's not doing your normal 9 to 5, Monday to Friday, and you're only paying them a little bit above the award, maybe that you're not paying them enough. So we do help our clients out a lot in ascertaining, if they want to pay an over and award salary, what is the right level for that salary.
Perfect. And obviously we're in the game of risks, right? So this is a key risk that we would suggest that our clients review. But what's another key risk that you manage on a day-to-day basis that you think clients need to manage?
So certainly underpayments, as I just mentioned, is a big one. When it comes to ending employment, so termination of employment, making sure that you're familiar with what process you need to follow. That changes slightly depending on whether you're under or over 15 employees. And also not just about following a process, about doing it in a way that's, dignified and respectful to the other person that's in that tricky situation of potentially losing their job. So making sure that our clients understand what those risks are. And then some clients might be quite risk averse, and then other clients might want to take a little bit more of a risk. So I say, well, yes, you can do X, Y, and Z. The risk of doing that is higher. And then, it's a balanced judgment call, because you don't know which employees might be more game to take you on, and which employees might just accept a decision and move on.
And so take us through that. You said the process changes slightly if it's sub 15 or greater than 15. How does that look? How is it different?
So I think for much smaller businesses, you still, for example, if you had someone that you needed to terminate for misconduct, let's say, you would still need to outline to them ahead of time what the misconduct is you're talking about. You would need to relate that to one of your policies, or perhaps some legislation or some wording in their employment contract, and then you would need to hear their response. So I think, gone are the days of you're fired. You have to have some sort of process, and then once you've heard their response, then you need to make a decision. And in making that decision, it's about balancing, kind of, does the punishment fit the crime, and looking at other factors that might be taken into consideration. Have they had performance issues before? Is this out of character? Do they have other things going on in their lives? Et cetera, et cetera.
And this is obviously something that many business owners may not have experience in managing people, right? Which so it makes sense to seek some advice and ensure that risk is taken care of. Because, we've seen plenty of situations where clients have been taken to the Human Rights Commission or whatever it might be, Fair Work. And then they find themselves paying legal fees. They may not even be at fault, but paying legal fees is the cost, really. All right, cool. And talk to me about the vision for, I guess, you as the business and Seed HR. but also the vision for HR generally and managing people and how you see that evolving.
So for us as a business, myself and Christy, my business partner, we want to continue growing, but not growing for the sake of growing. Growing, we've grown pretty organically, I think, over the last year. So continue on that journey without compromising the levels of service that we provide.
Yeah.
I think probably being more visible in terms of the range of services that we provide. So some people go, I didn't know you did that, or I didn't know you did this. So doing a bit more there. I think workplaces of the future will be getting the balance right between the use of technology and what are the skills that you can't get an AI tool to do, whether that's decision making or judgment or those types of skills I think are going to be needed. And then how do we build those skills up in organisations? The other key thing that continues to be asked is, onshoring versus offshoring. What tasks could I outsource or offshore overseas? And how do I go about doing that? And, really these days you can have a small business in Australia that's got people working in 6-7 different countries.
Yeah.
But that brings complexities of itself around, hiring or in other jurisdictions.
Are you a believer of the offshoring model, or what's your view on that?
I think if it's done well, and I think I would always recommend that you use a provider to do that for you and not do it direct. I think it works well if they are aligned with how we and our client business owners treat people, making sure that they are really cared for, looked after. They're not just treated as a number or a resource. And I think there's some really great providers that do that. But certainly, I think if you're going into that kind of arrangement just trying to save money, you've got the wrong mindset from the beginning, because those people are really going to be an important part of your team. And again, you've got to think about how you communicate well, how you ensure that they feel part of the team. Have you got money to bring them over to Australia maybe once a year for your team meetings, etc., etc. So that's my view.
And you touched on something a little bit about growth for growth's sake, and I feel like this speaks to an EVP to some degree, like the employee value proposition and possibly just the company values. And I'm not sure how active you are in this space in sort of helping out with those values, because I'm sure some businesses come to you and say, look, we have no values, but we want to hire our first staff. Do you help out with that?
Yeah, certainly. That's really interesting, working with business owners to think about their values, making sure they're actually picking words that are values, that they're not going with too many things and they keep it simple. But we also work with organisations doing a project at the moment where they've probably got about 8 values and they want to kind of reduce that. So we're going through a process of a survey first to get their thoughts, and then some focus groups at all levels, business owner level, manager level and employee level, to hone and refine what their abridged values are going to be. Yeah,
okay, cool. And I asked the question because it's interesting. For me, it relates so much to the notion that you said growth for growth's sake. Like, no doubt you've seen some immediate growth in your business. How do you maintain the motivation for your team to continue to grow at such high levels, right? Because it is growth for growth's sake. Like, for what purpose is the team trying to grow? Like, and how do you manage that with your clients?
I think we're lucky with our team, and they've got a lot of intrinsic motivation. They love what they do. And I think for all of us, it's that passion about being able to help more business owners, being able to support the creation or the maintenance of great workplaces where people feel safe and they can be vulnerable, and there's not toxic individuals or toxic cultures, or if there are, then we can come in and help to kind of reshape that environment. It's about that difference that we're making, and a little bit about, hiring just before we need to, so people aren't feeling too much of a pinch. It's
about making impact, isn't it? And it seems like your team feel the impact that they make for their clients. I know internally for us, we're in the insurance game, as you know. We very much view the business world doesn't really run or trade without insurance. And so we see ourselves as facilitators or enablers for our clients to grow their business. And with the right advice, they can make sure they're protected and continue to grow and take more risks. So that's most certainly. But I feel like a lot of clients out there, a lot of small businesses neglect the idea of where are we going. Like a 10-year goal seems big, hairy, audacious, but it needs to be tangible, right?
Yeah. And we work with a business coach, and we, sometimes your ego is saying, yeah, let's take over the world. We can have seed HR in every state. And then I'll come back down to earth and think, actually, where do we want to be in 5 years? You could have a huge turnover and really low percentage of profit.
Yeah.
So it's not just about looking at that one element. And for Christy and I, it's around how can we also create the lifestyle that we would like, as well as running our own business.
Perfect.
Yeah.
And so then, as a last sort of wisdom or nugget of gold, if you had to give some advice to a small business owner out there who doesn't have a HR department, but is looking to start hiring staff and is looking to build a proposition or build a set of values, what would they go? What would they do?
I think they would be really clear on what that person is, what they're bringing in that person to do. What do you want this person to do, and how do you want them to do it? And think about what are the behaviours that are going to be super acceptable and encouraged, and what are the things that are going to be complete deal breakers for you. And that doesn't have to be a complex train of thought. And then if you're interviewing that person, then tie some of your questions around asking, tell me about a time when, and relate that to some of the behaviours or the skills that you're looking for. So not only focus on technical skills, but how someone does things, how they behave, whether they are going to fit with this culture that you've created.
I love that, because I think the more that, even when the team gets a little bit bigger, we're at a point now where I feel like we've outgrown our values and we need to refine them and change them. And even when we then go and interview additional staff, it needs to be, these are our values. How does this person align with it? And if they don't align, they're really not a good fit. Many business owners, I've fallen into that bracket, is follow gut. And in some instances, probably not asking the right questions around values, and there can be a disparity at times, but most certainly I can see the value for that.
Gut feel definitely has a place, but I think you also need a little bit of structure.
Absolutely.
When you're making such an important decision.
Yeah, perfect. Well, Esther, how can people find you if they want to reach out?
Sure, they can find us on the website, www.seedhr.com.au, or my email, esthercolman@seedhr.com.au.
Perfect.
Or
Esther,
LinkedIn as well.
Yeah, LinkedIn's good.
Instagram. You can see me doing ridiculous videos on Instagram.
You are very active on Instagram, right? TikTok?
Not yet.
Watch this space.
Surely I'm too old for TikTok.
No, never too old. Never too old. Well, thank you for coming on the show. It's a pleasure. Obviously, managing people is such a key part to scaling any business. I like your motto in making sure that you protect your assets, which are your people, your most important assets. So thank you for coming on the show. Thank you for your points of wisdom, and I appreciate you coming on.
Great. Thanks for having me.
Socius, thank you for joining us today. Please hit the subscribe button if you've enjoyed this episode. And if you'd like to be part of the Socius community, follow us on Instagram, Facebook, and LinkedIn to stay in touch. Cheers.